Hey out there, and in this video, we're going to talk about there's so much confusion when it comes to the housing market. All these articles are coming out saying the housing market is still strong. There's an article we're going to talk about in this video that talks about that there's a different type of buyer in today's housing market that didn't exist back in 2008. And that's a good thing. Some parts of that article is spot on, but a lot of it just does not make any sense. So let's jump into this. Please, 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 if you like this type of content, do me the honor of smashing that like button, subscribe, comment, and share because I care. So let's get into this article. It's titled The Housing Market of 2022 has a totally different type of buyer from 2008. And it's a good thing. Now, this article is written by Daniel. May 13th, 2022. So this is a recent article, and I kind of went through it. So I'm going to pick apart the parts of the article. That's a tongue twister, right? That I agree with, and then point out some of the things that I believe this author is just dead wrong. And I'm going to kind of go behind the curtain, so to speak, and give you some information that very few people on the internet is talking about in terms of the housing bubble and certain things that could potentially lead to its demise. So without further ado, let's get into the news. First of all, this thing is talking about soaring home prices and historically low inventory made bidding wars and all cash offers common. And as more corporate buyers flooded the market, millions of Americans were left on the sideline, unable to compete. Now, that's true. We've seen that within the last, let's say, 18 to 24 months, that housing prices have just gone sky high. The average wage in this country is not keeping up with inflation. So you're getting a bifurcation, which basically means there is a split between the rise in housing prices and economic factors like your wages are not keeping up with those home prices. So people get to the point where they simply just cannot afford to buy a home. This was starting to happen even before interest rates started to rise. It was just something that was inevitable, in my humble opinion. Now, the article goes on to say down here, now the housing market is starting to cool, but relief for home buyers, particularly first-time home buyers, isn't likely, basically because the Fed is getting ready to raise rates, which is basically going to affect the rates that are 30-year mortgage and things like that. And they're saying that the Fed's basically doing this because their paramount concern right now is to fight inflation. Keep that in mind. Look at this right here. I'm going to come back to that later. Federal Reserve continues to raise interest rates in hopes of combating inflation, causing mortgage rates to soar. Okay, so rising rates made it so the average American family has to pay 34% of its monthly income to afford the typical family home, according to mortgage technology and data provider Black Knight. Now, I don't really agree with this. You guys can comment below, but most of us understand that because rent is going up crazy and all these other things that are going up to include home prices, the average person probably is paying a lot more than 34% of their monthly income towards a mortgage. I think it's substantially higher. I think that number is probably somewhere around 45%. So I think this number is grossly misrepresented in this article. He goes on to say, this Daniel guy, I don't believe we're in a housing bubble. Supply versus demand is significantly different than in the 2000s leading up to the housing crisis. Inventory still remains low due to supply chain issues, and demand persists with 5% mortgage rates. As long as inventory is low and total units remain near current levels, home prices should remain stable. Okay, this is just preposterous. It's flawed on so many different levels. So let me go into something a little bit deeper that kind of debunks this. And a lot of people aren't talking about it. So guys, listen up. I just recently read online that 70% of Americans have less than $1,000 in their savings account. 70%. The hot thing in the mortgage industry right now are ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages. They're typically they're the type of mortgage product that your rate is only fixed for so many years and then it starts to go up. So typically you hear something like this. I have a 3-in-1, a 5-in-1, or a 7-in-1 ARM. The first number determines how long your rate is fixed. The first example, 3, 5, then 7, respectfully. And then after that, it can adjust each year. Sometimes it can adjust as much as up to 2% per year, but typically an ARM will have an overall cap on it, which means over the life of the loan, it can get no higher than fill in the blank. I'm just coming up with an example. So let's say you get an ARM for 4%, it's fixed for 5 years. Thereafter the 5-year period, your ARM has expired. So now it starts to adjust. Depending upon how that paperwork is set up, it can adjust as much as 2% per year. And it may say something like it cannot exceed more than 4 or 5% than where you got fixed. So you started at 4, it can go no higher than 9. I'm just throwing it out there. So disclosure, read your paperwork, but that's typically how an adjustable rate mortgage works. The reason why that's a problem is because people are still FOMOing in, fear of missing out, and they're taking these adjustable rate mortgages and are buying houses at the top of a housing bubble. This is a recipe for disaster. This is why I do not agree with this statement here about just because of inventory and things of that nature that prices should remain stable. Okay, today's buyers are less vulnerable. Now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes, and I'm going to share some more information that's just going to blow this stuff out of the water. So pay attention, guys. Looking at the credit scores of home buyers in 2022, Bank of America research analyst Thomas Thornton found that the portion of buyers with so-called super prime FICO scores of 720 or above is at 75%. During the years preceding the 2008 housing bust, just 25% of buyers boasted similar strong credit. So they're talking about there's a lot of people here that have good credit. FHA is a low down payment program and makes a significant portion of the mortgages in the United States. Now, technically, you can write a FHA mortgage for $580, but most lenders probably going to do it at around $620. Some say $640. But the point being is that some people perceive an FHA mortgage as a subprime mortgage just because of the low credit score that's required in order to get that type of mortgage. It doesn't really talk about that in this particular article. And that is a perplexing problem on its own. The quality of outstanding mortgage debt is pristine. Once again, I disagree with that. Household debt compared to disposable income has also fallen roughly 30% from the highs of the great financial crisis. The investment bank says an overall leverage in the housing market remains far below what we've seen in 2007, 2008. Now this guy should be flogged. Listen, guys, the investment banker says as overall leverage in the housing market remains far below what was seen in 2007, 2008. Okay, let's pause for the cause. Here we go. Leverage, number one, we've got what? Almost 1.75. Let's just round that up. $1.8 trillion of student loan debt. Credit card debt is probably somewhere around 900 billion. It's fastly approaching 1 trillion. This is credit card debt. Both of the aforementioned student loans and credit card debt is unsecured debt. Mortgage debt in its totality in the United States is about $18 trillion. Okay, so we're definitely in a bubble. We have more consumer debt now than we have in history. What's happening, and people aren't talking about this, is that this inflation factor is eating people up. It doesn't matter how low your interest rate is if you're paying so much more money in gas, in food, in electricity, and in energy, and just overall prices and products and services in our economy. That eats away at your disposable income. In my humble opinion, the latter part of this year, we will definitely see a recession. This is not financial advice. This is just my humble opinion. And I also think you're going to see a significant uptick in people being laid off. So if the aforementioned turn out to be reality, which I'm comfortable in saying that they will, it's a moot point how low your interest rate is if you don't have a job. It's almost a moot point if you can't pay for food, you can't pay for energy, you can't pay for all of these inflationary factors that are putting pressure on your family budget. that can put somebody upside down to a point where they can no longer afford the home that they're in, despite having a record low interest rate. Let's say, a couple years ago, you locked in at a 30-year fix below 3%, but you and your wife have just lost your job. Does that really matter at that point? You need sustainable, verifiable income to stay in your home. You need sustainable, verifiable income to get a loan modification. So once again, this is really, really poorly researched. I don't think this guy put that much time into it, but I digress. During the housing bubble, household mortgage debt exploded higher from 70 to 100% of disposable income, fueled in part by predatory lending. Okay, so that's also a big misconception. I've talked about this before, so I'm going to say it again for the record. Probably about 25% of the mortgages that led up to the mortgage crisis in 2008 were considered toxic mortgages or people who never should have gotten a mortgage. Some people come up with this narrative that they believe that that was the main impetus behind the housing crisis in 2008. It was not. It was people treating their homes as ATM machines. That was a big portion. That's what's happening now. Also, this rise currently of so many people jumping into adjustable rate mortgages. These are all precursors to getting to the end of a bubble that inevitably will pop. So that's all I really wanted to say about this article. I hope you guys found this information practical and informative. Like I said, consumer debt is at an all-time high with student loans, credit card, mortgage debt, inflation at a 40-year high. We have all these other inflationary factors that can affect a household that could compel them to get to the point where, hey, I just can't make this payment anymore. Or if we happen to see unemployment start to tick up in the latter half of 2022, which is what I predict in my humble opinion. So once again, if you are enjoying this type of content, please do me a great honor. Hit that subscribe button, comment, and share because I care. And this was the Kevin Strong Show, and I'll see you guys in the next video.